The Kings of the Hellenistic Period in the Levant, Part 2. Following the death of Ptolemy II, his kingdom was taken over by his wife, Bernice. She had already secured the governorship of Syria for her son Antiochus, and now she promoted him to king of all Egypt, even though he was only about 10 years old at the time. As we can see here, he's sitting on the throne with a pharaoh's beard glued on, looking like an infant trying to play an adult role. The Egyptians weren't too happy about this young king, so Bernice had to rule in Antiochus's stead until he came of age. But she wasn't exactly a benevolent ruler, and it turned out that she had to go. In 130 BC, Antiochus came of age and took the throne for himself. But his mother remained regent until her death in 128 BC. He was just 19 when he became the sole ruler of Ptolemaic Egypt. But unfortunately, he also started a war with the Seleucids in the same year. That's right. Even though he was half Syrian and half Macedonian, Antiochus was actually fighting against his own relatives. You know how the British royal family is squabbling over who should sit on the throne. Well, this was kind of like that, except times infinity. This was the Third Syrian War. Yes, there were two before this one, and I didn't mention them because they didn't really do anything important. But this third war would change everything. The goal of this conflict was the possession of Syria, which was pretty important for controlling trade between Egypt and Mesopotamia. After fighting for 3 years, both sides were exhausted, and therefore a compromise was reached. Antiochus got most of what he wanted, obtaining Syria along with Phoenicia, while Ptolemy got Samaria and retained control of the crucial port of Gaza. It was a good outcome for Antiochus, especially considering that he also got some nice gifts from his grandmother, Queen Laodice II of Syria, after she died in 122 BC. These gifts included Cyprus, which had been ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty since 58 BC, and parts of Anatolia, including the city of Antioch, which he made his new capital. So at the end of the day, despite being the one who started the war, Antiochus basically ended up with the same amount of territory as his grandfather, Ptolemy I, had when he first seized the Egyptian throne. He was probably aware of this fact, which is why he called himself the second Ptolemy and used a double-headed eagle as a symbol, combining the Greek and Egyptian iconography. But sometimes I wonder if he did unstart the war with the Ptolemies, not because he wanted more land, but because he wanted to justify taking the title of pharaoh, because from that moment on, Antiochus started acting very Egyptian. He built temples and made offerings to Egyptian gods. And he also married 2 Egyptian princesses, Selene, the daughter of King Ptolemy, whom he married before turning 20, and Bernice, the daughter of King Ptolemy. I mean, you can call me crazy, but to me it seems that if you marry 2 princesses from your rival kingdom after defeating them in war, you don't need any other reason to be called a pharaoh. And even though Cleopatra and her siblings were still children when their father died, Antiochus didn't hesitate to take them from their mother and force them into marriage with him. I guess he thought that this would be the best way to secure his eastern borders. Anyway, Antiochus did a lot of building projects in Alexandria, such as the Temple of Zeus, the Serapeum, and the Bullion, which is where the famous lighthouse was located, among many other things. Under his reign, Alexandria continued to prosper and become one of the largest cities in the ancient world, boasting 500,000 inhabitants. But that wasn't enough for Antiochus. He wanted to make his capital even greater. So he embarked on an ambitious building project, which was to turn Antioch, in Syria, into a new Alexandria. It was a very ambitious project, but with the help of his advisors, Apollodorus of Athens and Heracles, it was possible. They completely redesigned the city, building huge streets and impressive public buildings. One of the most important structures was the Odeon, which could hold 10,000 spectators and was meant to be used for theatrical performances and poetry readings. The city walls were also reinforced to protect it from invaders, and the harbor was expanded to make it capable of hosting a whole fleet of warships. In just a few decades, Antioch went from being a small village of no more than 30,000 people to becoming the largest city in the Hellenistic world with 400,000 inhabitants. And then there was the Temple of Daphne, which was built after Antiochus dedicated the city to his patron god, Apollo Daphne. In 104 BC, he had a vision of the god riding a chariot drawn by 4 horses while hunting a lion. So he decided to build a temple in honor of the event, hiring the architect and engineer Zenodorus of Bithynia for the project. The temple was massive, with 180 columns made of white marble that surrounded the cella or the main chamber of the sanctuary. Inside of it, there was a statue of Apollo riding a chariot and holding a bow and arrows. There was also a priestess and a chorus dressed as Galavidians, which are these horse-riding warriors from Scythia. And last but not least, the Oracle of Daphne, which was basically the Egyptian Book of the Dead in Greek translation, which the priestess supposedly used to tell fortunes. This was the largest cult center of Apollo in the eastern Mediterranean, with pilgrims coming from all around to worship him there. But wait, there's more. Antiochus also defeated the Nabateans twice, expanding his control over the Arabian Peninsula. Then he crushed an Achaean invasion into Anatolia, proving himself to be a capable military commander. After that, he led an expedition into Mesopotamia to defeat the Parthians. But his army was annihilated and he barely escaped with his life. and that's when he met the mysterious Queen of Sheba. Now, if you've watched my video about her, you know that she's a legendary figure whose historicity is heavily debated. If she was indeed a real historical person, then she lived in the 2nd century BC and ruled over the kingdom of Sheba, which is believed to have been located in modern-day Yemen. According to the historian Strabo, she lived during the reign of King Solomon, but he probably meant Antiochus instead because Solomon lived in the 10th century BC. When Antiochus encountered the queen, he was traveling through her kingdom and needed supplies for his army. In exchange, he offered her a chance to join him in his campaign against the Parthians, but Queen Sheba refused and gave him half of what he asked for, forcing him to move on. Enraged by her insolence, Antiochus destroyed her trading ships and left. The thing is that the kingdom of Sheba was known for its trade connections, especially its incense trade, which was a valuable commodity in the ancient world. By destroying her ships, Antiochus cut off a huge source of income for the kingdom, and he also provoked the wrath of the queen. In retaliation, she assembled a large army and marched against him, beating him and his forces and chasing them all the way back to the borders of his kingdom. So Antiochus never recovered from this defeat. He tried to invade Parthia again a couple of years later, but once again he lost and died soon after, in 68 or 67 BC. His 2 wives, Cleopatra and Bernice, would go on to rule Egypt together as co-regents for several years after his death, giving birth to 7 children, 6 sons and a daughter. But that's going to be for next week. Thanks for watching.